What is going on, everyone? We are back with This Week in the House of Fraud. I'm Brian, and as always, joined by Jordan. What's going on today?
What's up, man? Let's talk about some fraud tools, shall we? So,
Yeah, you were just at a concert.
yeah,
Well, I
I
probably
wish I
were
was.
as well. Probably were as well, but conference. Now, I think at this point, when this comes out, it'll be a couple weeks. But
Yeah. So, I do make it a point, and I think that fraud tools that have local user summits are kind of ahead of the game because it's nice to get their users together in a spot to talk about some of the problems that are happening, and then they can kind of talk about how they use the product. So, a lot of the larger tools do have conferences, summits. We call them summits.
yeah,
And I've been to quite a few of those. So I just got back from one, and it got me thinking because I see a lot of the names and the badges and a lot of the people that are using these tools, but everybody has kind of used different tools lately. So it used to be use a certify or you use threat metrics. And there was a period at the end of that sentence. And threat metrics had their own conference, certify has their own conference. Those are great. But now the industry is a lot more fragmented. You have companies like the Riskifieds, the Forwarders, the Sardines, all of these other companies, Signifieds, another one with an S. But it got me thinking, like, what is everybody using? So I asked a question this week in the House Fraud to ask what different tools, and I was a little surprised. Like, I thought I was going to hear more people talking about using the big boys, and I didn't. So yeah, uh, obviously, there's people trying to, talk about multi-layered approaches, like the multiple tools they use. But I was really after like what your main tool was, and some of the other ones that were mentioned, was like BioCatch, BehavioSect, like some of the newer ones that you don't see a lot of people using. But like I've had BehavioSect on my show before, and by all accounts, that's a fantastic product. You're in the LexisNexis ecosystem, and that can be off-putting for some people, but I mean, you get access to like their other tools like Bridger, which is super useful. Like we're doing a lot of OFAC stuff right now, and like that tool has been like a life changer for us. So, what are your thoughts on fraud tools, and what are your recent ideas?
so about a year ago, MRC came out with a report, which I think was the first time anyone kind of compiled this type of landscape of like the validating of, am I using too many tools? Am I not using enough tools? And it was, I think 2 years ago, the average was 4 tools. And then this
Yep.
past
Yep. Yep.
year, I think was 5 tools, if I remember. So slight increase, slight bump. And I think this is fraud specific, is my guess, or it was unclear. I'm making assumptions. It's unclear if this is fraud specific tools or tools your team uses, i.e., like an operating management system, a CRM system, things that aren't necessarily considered fraud specific,
Mm-hmm.
but hold customer information or customer communications. Maybe a marketing tool has attribution of what channels users are coming through or traffic's coming through. So you can associate first touch to last touch to this is more likely legitimate. This is more likely fraudulent. So
Yeah.
when you bring it in all like that, I'm unsure if those were or were not considered tools, which then can
I
kind
was
of change us a little bit.
after my main goal was after like your primary tool. So like I'm gonna say like and I heard our primary tool is Riskify. That is the tool that's making the decisions if a person can continue on their purchase or not. Now, that being said, we have internal tools as well, and there's some
Yeah.
conversation about internal tools here, where a lot of people are saying that should be their primary tools are built internally. This one person is saying, supplemented by a bunch of outside tools. I would say that for us, it's the opposite. That our internal tools are like super, super, super crazy, basic business logic. They are not the primary decision maker. The primary decision maker is our fraud tool, and there's a reason. The reason that we want that is we don't want our binary logic to get in the way of the more sophisticated, nuanced decisions that the fraud tool makes, because we think we would probably lead to more false positives with our internal logic being too hardcore. Now, when I say internal rules, I'm talking about negative lists, positive lists. I'm talking about OFAC lists. I'm talking about certain dollar amounts and regions and mismatch
Yeah.
on regions credit card, like the super basic stuff that like we can just chop off before it even gets to authorization, because you got to pay for authorization, you got to pay for settlement. Now, in the past, I would say again, at another company, like let's say there was a major company, I used a certify as the primary tool. So to answer this question, I would have said a certify. However, in reality, it used to use Emailage, now it uses Akata. So
Hmm.
there's another tool there. And then on the back end, it uses the certified chargeback tool. There's another one there, but it also uses the alerts, so it uses some Ethica alerts, some of the alerts that come standard from the processors now these days. So it uses essentially 4 tools there now in reality. But the one that I was after in this question was a primary. Like, who's making the decisions? Is this fraud or not? At the
I
end of the
think
day.
the responses fell into two categories for me. And I think when you bring up vertical specific groups, it's very centric to here's all of what you see. So it's normally these are the tools that focus within here. What was interesting to see was bringing together people who are kind of more horizontal focus at the career level of the tools they use and the discrepancy between industries.
Yeah.
And one industry breaking it down of very comprehensive, almost double the tools compared to a different industry. And very specific. And if you look at the people within kind of more of the fintech space,
Yeah,
are
I was
very
just looking at that.
specific at breaking down each step and risk associated to it versus other industries where it's just like, here's all of our tools we use, and they're kind of blended together. Very thoughtful and tactical where and when different tools are run for different industries. And just like, obviously, in my career of like helping on building out fraud tools and from like a orchestration side of things, like I see that I am more visible to different industries, but having people talk to each other and not because of me or directly with me is a different level of like variance and understanding of like people do think about solving fraud differently and the risks
Mhm.
associate the risks oh what brain just refresh or something right there.
Hey,
The
every
risks
time you gotta get
associated
a
to it.
little restart there, like a little hard reset in the middle.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess it's just one of those days very early in the week, but really the breakdown of the different tools on the different platforms industries of how they think about it. And then there's a couple others that like blend into maybe a little bit of both and how they think about it. And definitely product specific, then put a little bit more emphasis on I usually think about like if the first one that comes to mind is usually the go-to, and the trickle downs are usually like, oh yeah, we also use this. Oh yeah, we also use this. So how
Yeah.
people prioritize and talk about them is also different. Of like, yes, there might be overlap of tools, but the importance and priority of tools, kind of like what you just said, of what's your primary source of your decisions, and everything else is going to fall around that. And part of that is choosing which risky event do you really want to focus on? New accounts,
Yeah.
transactions, logins.
Good. I think that's a good point too, because like even here at iHerb, like I could even go a step further and say we also use human,
Mhm.
uh, which that is not doesn't land on my team. That lands on the security team because that is our bot prevention, that is our, account signups, that is our logins. It's watching those sorts of things. We also have a homegrown tool for logins too. That's pretty damn effective. Um, so I mean, I guess we could add that one on to what we do here, but at the end of the day, I don't normally count that because that's not something that my team uses or accesses or has any interface with, But I'm looking at some like there's a comment on here that like you said, every layer has something that they did. And I mean, I wish I could have this many tools, pretty much got everything. But like they do have the cyber on that comment as well. They have their version of what we use for human. Well, I think everybody uses recapture
Yeah,
too.
I think
I
the
can
cool
think of
piece of
a
where
website
this
on the planet that
conversation
doesn't.
went to is also of like, how do I get this many tools? Of like, I wish I was like that person. How do I get the budget and not have finance cut something? Like I'm
Yeah,
fighting to keep my tools when I know I need new tools. I would love this state, but right now I am fighting to just keep what I have.
so tell us, Brian, how do we get new tools, and how do we get to keep the ones we have? Tell us. Rob a bank? Do some fraud?
Yeah, I don't know. Internal budgeting. The A lot of what I do on the day to day outside of this is working with people of helping them articulate and educate internally where they sit the value. And there's a couple factors to me when I think about taking a step back, because I can't necessarily always include this in conversations, but first time founders or leadership have a little bit different knowledge and aptitude of risk compared to multi or serial founders and leadership, aka if they've been hit by fraud, they understand why they need to care about it versus I'll worry about this when it's a problem. That changes the tone and the perspective, which then changes how I approach the conversations of education. Like if my leadership has been crushed by fraud, they're going to be like, I get it. Like identity theft sucked at my last company. I get why we need this tool. And
Yeah.
you need less of it. Understanding the industry you come from. Now, this is the hard part for fintechs and marketplaces. Usually you're a little less regulated. So you don't really have the compliance check the box. You do need to prove ROI. You do need to show return on value. If you do sit in a little bit more of a regulated function or you're able to get a compliance check the box, those are usually easier conversations because it's less on, well, what's the investment and what will we get out of it? And then you can check the box. The other piece to it is cost of inaction. What it's less, not necessarily always, well, we need a new tool because most decisions end in not bringing in a new tool. It isn't like this tool versus all the competitors. It is we're good enough with where we stand today. And if you're positioning it of like, well, we need something new, and then they come back, your biggest competitor, your biggest competition is actually the current state that you're in. Why do you need an improvement? And if you're unable to show the cost of inaction, then it's going to be harder to have that conversation because the grounds you're standing on are shaky to begin with. And that's usually where, at least in my career, I've seen leadership come back at me and ask the hard but right questions. They're without a doubt, when you think about it from a business perspective of leading the business, that is where they should answer those questions. And when you're so focused on the queue and investigating and your head is down, you're not thinking about it from the lens of a executive leader who's meeting and to meeting to meeting to meeting. Their brain's tired. So you have to make it easy to understand of like, what's the impact
Yeah.
today?
That's where like I think like, it comes back to like storytelling and stuff
Hmm.
is like you need to be able to demonstrate in a story like why you would need that tool and why the money's worth it. I think like there's a lot of tools. I think a lot of salespeople same thing. Like they'll call me and be like, "Wouldn't it be great if you had that?" So I'm like, "Yeah, it'd be great," but like at the same time, like I kind of don't need that right now. Like I don't have enough of a problem to justify the cost. Like my actual fraud losses, I know exactly what they are every month, and that tool would cost more than that to solve a problem that like doesn't technically even exist at that point. So I think that you really need to know what the cost of that specific tool is going to solve
Yep.
at the end of the day, like very, very, very specifically. And so, and like most people, I think a lot of the tools that are out there right now are more supplemental to your main tool, like getting email intelligence or doing identity verifications. Like those aren't like your fraud tools; those are supplemental to your fraud tools. So, how much are you
Well, it
losing
depends
on
on,
having
again,
bad
industry
identities?
and product.
Yeah,
So some of
yeah.
those can be
But
the
bank can
connecting
care
piece
more
and
about
depending
verifying
on what
identity.
tool you use. So where I see the value is a company that doesn't want to add in a ton of friction point upfront, and you're kind of doing a little bit more of the back end data enrichment, then you're able to get a little bit more of comprehensive profile of an individual on your platform to make a
Yeah, and
better
that's more when you're
decision.
building your own models or having a tool that's more hands-on that
Yeah.
needs like the certifies where you can plug other things into those tools. The more you put into it, the more accurate you could write rules around. But
Yeah.
like some of these new tools, like the riskifieds, the forters, where like you don't get to add any more information, you kind of get what you get. Like, I don't see a real need to do email validation on top of it because that's kind of what they're doing, and they're already buying data from these same companies like at data and everything. Like why double down on that when that's their job to do?
Well, I think
We
that's
had
the
this.
confusing piece of buying tools is what you don't recognize is a lot of vendors purchase data directly from other vendors. So the idea is like, well, if we're not going to get the sale, I'd rather have a part of the sale than no sale. And there's a lot of value in business within vendors who do that. But as marketing wise and sometimes agreement wise, you can't come out and say that depending on the relationships. So you as a merchant might be like, "Oh, well, they already do this." And then they're like, "Yeah, we know they already do it because it's actually our data." So now you're like you kind of said of like, how do you want to go about it? Are you going to build something in-house yourself? If you're thinking about that, then understanding where the data really is coming from, who owns the data, and cutting out the
Yeah.
middlemen. Or do the middlemen what added value do the middlemen actually have? And sometimes it's like, I would love to build a score, and I will never build a score. So I'm okay by using the vendor who gives me that
100%.
output that I need, who is buying the data sources already that I will need
Adding new
anyway.
features
So
on their own, like the newest, hottest
one
features, like they're
contract, I
doing
don't
that
need
for
multiple
you.
contracts. So there's arguments to both. It's kind of like, what do you think you're going to want to do? How long? And honestly, like, be honest with yourself. How long are you going to be at that company? Are you going to be there 2 years? Are you going to be there 10 years, 5 years? And how's that fit into negotiating several contracts and ripping out your infrastructure? If you're there and you can get it within the timeline, that's something to consider. I think there's a lot, it goes unsaid, which then puts vendors, honestly, in a bad position to be like, I'm just trying to help you get you what you want. And when you're not being honest with the salespeople, that's when you get frustrated that they followed up with you 17 times. Now, yes, there's probably a better way to communicate, but if you're not being honest and clear and transparent with the people who are trying to help you, like, there are, believe it or not, there are good salespeople out there. There are good customer success people out there. There are good founders out there who are actually legitimately trying to help you. And in return, you waste their time by not being clear and transparent and kind of this stop start limbo. So it goes both ways when I see that those types of conversations come out. Like, there are good people on the vendor side out there.
Yeah. What else you got going on this week? Anything?
As we're recording this, I just got off a call on the vendor side of understanding the fraud landscape. Well, probably mid August, we'll have a micro masterclass on really understanding the different breakdown of the tools in the different for different industries and how they fit within your stack. I kind of like building the fraud stack that you really want to fill the gaps of what you had. You kind of said of like, if I'm at 80% and this tool is going to bring me from 80% to 82%, do I really need to invest in this? I don't know.
Mm,
But if it's going to bring me from 40% to 65%, now that's a different type of argument. It's understanding the coverage you have today and how these different pieces fit together. So if you're interested in this micro masterclass, this is coming out within pretty soon, but the micro masterclass itself will be a live event within the community in the middle of August. So hope to see you there. What else do you got?
I think I got a whole lot. It's been a busy couple of weeks. Last week I had my team lunch, so that was fun. And then this week we have the probably the day that this episode is out. Actually, we have our company directors and above meeting, so that'll be fun to go see everybody. We do that twice a year. It's cool because as a remote company, we don't get to all see each other very often, which is one thing. But like we all are kind of just heads down working on our own projects, and it is fairly often that you find out about a project only after it was launched because something changed. So it's nice to get everybody together and like just talk about what everybody's working on, do some slides, throw some slides up on the thing, and then it sparks a lot of conversations like, hey, by the way, that's probably going to blow up my thing, or hey, that's a really cool idea. Like we could use that too. So can't wait for that. That's happening while this is live. So
Cool.
yeah.
I think that's about all on my end. Always try to make these easy, digestible to give people an insight of what the fraud community is talking about. The House of Fraud is a community for fraud experts who want to build a successful career together. So if you want to be a part of these conversations, not just listen to them, hop on in. Love to see you there.
Yeah, and remember, nobody goes to school for fraud. See you around.